Good morning, everyone. This is Leah Davies from the Texas Office for Prevention of Developmental Disabilities. We're very appreciative that you all took the time this morning to join us so that we can talk together about FASD and hear from some of our Texas FASD Collaborative Steering Committee members. Specifically, you're going to be hearing from Diana Mitchell, who is one of the co-chairs of the Education Work Group. Her other co-chair, Sherry Santa, is online as well, but won't be presenting specifically. I'm also happy to welcome Julie Steed and Lisa Harrison Ramirez, both from the Department of State Health Services and both members of the Texas FASD Collaborative Steering Committee. Ladies, if we're ready to go ahead and get started, feel free. We can move on to the first slide. Diana or Julie or Lisa, I'm not sure. Can you guys hear?
Yes.
Okay, great. Whenever you're ready.
Diana's going to start us off.
Yes. Good morning, everyone. I'm Diana Mitchell, and I work at Alpha Home in San Antonio, Texas. The first slide you see is about the Texas Office for Prevention of Developmental Disabilities. I'm sorry, I'm having a little bit of difficulty on my screen, but it's the group that organizes the Texas FASD Collaborative. They are a state agency currently administratively attached to the Texas Health and Human Service Commission. As transformation happens, the office relationship with HHSC will change, but the Texas FASD Collaborative will continue. TOPDD is a state agency that operates more like a nonprofit in that they're expected to raise most of their own funds. They have a small but committed staff, and I can vouch for that, who rely on the incredible knowledge and expertise within you all. The volunteer members of the FASD Collaborative and within other volunteers and other parts of their work, child safety and children with co-occurring intellectual or developmental disabilities and mental health conditions, to get their work done. TOPDD is unique from other state agencies who also work with individuals with developmental disabilities in that the state asks them to focus on prevention. The office has continued to work on primary prevention, but also on preventing additional challenges for families who are impacted by an FASD, secondary prevention. The way that the office works is by organizing volunteer leaders from across the state, like each of you, to tackle these challenges together. Within the FASD Collaborative, we have 3 work groups: Surveillance and Epidemiology, who focus on data and research related to FASD in Texas; Education, strategically getting the word out to Texans about FASD; and Promotions, focusing on the policy opportunities and impacts related to FASD and providing information to our policymakers about FASD. We are lucky that our collaborative is strong in number and in types of people who are at the table. We're ready to advance the slide, please.
Thank you, Diana. This is Julie Steed, and I'm excited to be on this call with y'all. I'm going to talk a little bit about fetal alcohol spectrum disorders. Although many of you are familiar with FASD, many Texans are not. FASD is the term for the range of difficulties which can be caused by prenatal exposure to alcohol. The term fetal alcohol spectrum disorders is not a clinical term. It is actually an umbrella term used to describe the range of impacts. There are many diagnoses, not all of which are reflected here in this image, which fall underneath the umbrella term FASD. The term spectrum within the FASD acronym is similar to the terms used in autism spectrum disorders. It tells us there are many different manifestations of FASD and that not all people with FASD are impacted in the exact same way. Generally, people are more likely to have heard of FAS, fetal alcohol syndrome, than FASD. This is due in part of that the term FAS has been around since 1970s. And the term FASD is a newer term. People who have FAS are often identified because of their physical facial features, which make children with FAS appear similar even when they are not related. The FAS diagnosis requires 3 things: brain or central nervous system damage and growth deficiency, and 3 specific facial features, which y'all have all seen: the thin upper lip, the flat philtrum, which is the space between the bottom of the nose and the top of the upper lip, and usually the width of their eye is more narrow than a person without a FASD would typically have. Often trained medical professionals can identify FASD, so please do not go around diagnosing people based on your perception about their appearance. The majority of people who are impacted by prenatal exposure to alcohol and who may have an FASD do not have FAS, those 3 facial features. So they have typical features, and you cannot necessarily see their diagnosis. This means that many people with an FASD are not identified at birth as children or for many ever. There is very limited FASD diagnostic capacity in Texas, so many people with an FASD never receive a diagnosis within the FASD spectrum. We'll talk more about this as some of the behavioral, learning, and social implications caused by this permanent brain change that results from prenatal alcohol exposure later. We recommend that collaborative members put this person first language first. So when we have someone that we're talking to, we want to say, instead of FASD kids, we want to say children who have FASD. So the point to take away is, remember that FASD is an umbrella term with multiple diagnoses underneath it, similar to autism. Also, don't forget that majority of people are impacted by prenatal exposure, alcohol exposure, that have a typical appearance. Next slide, please. Many people are curious about how prevalent FASD really is. The conservative prevalence rates that were previously widely accepted were 1 per 100 children may have an FASD. However, there's new research from Dr. Philip May and colleagues show us that the number for FASD in the general population may be at least double that, in the range of 2 to 5 of every 100 children. Using this national 2 to 5% estimate and about 380,000 births per year in Texas, there may be approximately 7,000 to 19,000 children born each year in our state with an FASD. So the answer is, this could be very prevalent in our state. Please note that FASD prevalence figures are always an estimate. There's not a straightforward surveillance information on FASD, so comparing it to other conditions is kind of tricky. However, there are many more cases of FASD each year occurring than there are of spina bifida, Down syndrome, and childhood cancers, and other onset type 1 diabetes combined. But many of us have not heard of FASD. So this info is presented to us by 2011 Texas Births. Next slide.
Thanks, Julie. There's still quite a bit of research being done on why prenatal exposure seems to affect some children and not others. And the bottom line is that there are many unknowns. We do know that some fetuses are just more susceptible to damage. They're naturally healthier or less healthy. Genetics is also a factor influencing susceptibility of impact from alcohol. For example, one fraternal twin may be affected and the other not due to difference in genetic makeup, not in the amount of or time of exposure. We also know that mom's wellness is particularly important and can work as a protective factor if she is healthy, or can make the impact on her developing fetus more serious if she is in poor health herself. So women whose nutritional status is poor appear to have children who are more impacted by alcohol during pregnancy. Advanced maternal age is another consideration that scientists are looking at now. If a mother has had a previous pregnancy that was alcohol and or other drug exposed, the chances of additional future pregnancies being more negatively impacted if she continues to use increase. So encouraging prenatal vitamins for any woman you know is a good thing. It can only help to increase her nutritional status and the associated protective factors for healthy fetal development. Some interesting facts here from Ashley, Samsa, and Project Choice's research group on who is at risk of having a child with an FASD. The short answer to who is at risk is that any woman who drinks during pregnancy has a risk of having a child with an FASD. So you might think about why might a woman with an FASD be at high risk for having a child who is prenatally exposed? Next slide. So what is the research telling us? We should all have some familiarity with the science behind and around FASD prevention and intervention. As a collaborative, we need to be as informed as possible, and this information should really guide our collective work. From a prevention standpoint, the CDC recently released some information regarding the importance of talking with women before they become pregnant about the dangers of prenatal alcohol exposure. It makes sense that the more often a woman hears this information before she is pregnant, the better, right? Knowledge is power, and if a woman is planning to become pregnant and has this information, we increase her opportunity to abstain during the process of attempting to become pregnant and early pregnancy before the pregnancy is detected. The CDC also notes that once a woman goes off birth control, that is ideally when she should stop drinking. Dr. Bakarova is a member of the FASD Collaborative, and she has identified a biomarker that indicates prenatal alcohol exposure has occurred. Her published research on this topic helps us to understand that utilizing newborn blood spot cards, sometimes called Gusset cards, taken shortly after the baby is born to detect prenatal alcohol exposure is both feasible and is also an effective way to increase our knowledge about how many children might be impacted by an FASD. It's important to note that the presence of this biomarker on the newborn blood spot is not an FASD diagnosis. All it tells us is that there is some prenatal alcohol use in the final weeks of pregnancy. And there are many ways that this information could be used in the future, and that is very exciting. New research is telling us that both genes contributed by both parents, as well as that of the genes that are exposed to, can impact a child's likelihood to have an FASD if prenatal alcohol exposure occurs. The related study of gene traits that get flipped on or off based on environment is called epigenetics. We are learning that a father's genetic contribution to a developing fetus can possibly impact the likelihood of that child's prenatal alcohol exposure if the child is exposed, creating negative changes to the developing fetus. So although a child is not able to have an FASD if the mother abstains from alcohol throughout pregnancy, even in the time before she knew that she was pregnant, a father's genes can make it more likely for an FASD to happen if a mother does drink during pregnancy. People often ask about a father's role with FASD. In addition to his genetic contribution, which science is showing us does matter, a father's influence on the mother is an important one. There is also new research showing the impacts of prenatal alcohol exposure 3 generations down the line. People who learn about FASD through attending a presentation like this or through talking to someone on the FASD Collaborative like yourselves often ask about how we can identify whether or not a person has an FASD. Because FASD diagnostic assessment capacity is so limited in Texas, some of these new opportunities are even more exciting. There is research around subtle changes to the face that can be caused by alcohol beyond just the known facial changes in a person who has a diagnosis of FAS. This gives people impacted by one of the other less obvious FASDs hope, because it could potentially impact their likelihood to be able to access much needed services. Similarly, researchers are learning more about the brain changes that can be caused by alcohol as well as how to detect them. And last but not least, there is research happening around ways to better support and provide services to help people with an FASD towards improved outcomes. Next slide, and I'm going to pass this on to Julie.
Next slide, please. Okay, well, we'll keep going and they'll catch up with us. There we go. Okay, so if you've met one person with an FASD, then you've met one person with an FASD. And although every individual has unique strengths and challenges, there is a pattern when we're looking at the behaviors commonly associated with a person who has an FASD. You may look at this list of behaviors and think, wow, that sounds like a bunch of other things I'm familiar with, like autism, especially when you think of social skill deficits and memory formation and attention and time reaction. However, what sets FASD apart is the fact that a person with an FASD is likely to have challenges in multiple areas. FASD experts called FASD say because there are global challenges in many areas of life to the way people with an FASD live and function. People with an FASD may have better expressive language skills than they do receptive language skills. So they can tell you or repeat to you what the rules are, but they may not be able to understand what the rules actually are. For example, there is also a benefit to providing instruction to someone with an FASD, child or adult, in more than one way using multiple senses. So perhaps we may allow physical movement for the consumer that we're working with, even during times when that is not traditionally allowed. Short-term memory is often impaired in a person with an FASD. So when a person with an FASD appears to forget something immediately after you just told them about it, this may be due to their brain-based disability and not necessarily because they're trying to annoy you or manipulate you or just lazy. Regular repetition is a key strategy for those who work with a person who has FASD. There is regular difficulty with paying attention or staying on task for a person with an FASD. So there are many kids who have both ADHD and FASD, but there are also many kids who just have plain old FASD and may have been misdiagnosed. Either way, a short attention span and impulsive behaviors are fairly typical for people with an FASD. Consistent routines and advanced notification about transitions is a very helpful strategy here. Even for people who have an FASD and a normal IQ, there may be a delayed in cognitive pace. So this could mean that it may take them longer to complete a task than you might expect, or that they may need a little bit of time to understand and process something that has happened earlier on. Social skills are very impactful. Often a person with an FASD has a difference between their chronicle age and their developmental age. This may mean that they get along best with people who are younger than them. Another characteristic related to this is that people with an FASD are often friendlier and eager to please and want social connection. This can certainly be a strength, but unfortunately, though, this may make them an easy prey for negative social peers who may take advantage of their desire to be liked. Stress and trauma are certainly reciprocal and can often co-occur. For example, imagine a person with FASD who is in a school setting that is challenging for them for any number of reasons. Social skills are difficult, learning ability can be affected, attention, and overstimulation with the school lights and sounds of a school cafeteria. Who may also experience some mental health concerns and do over 90% of people with an FASD. It is not unlikely that this child may experience some bullying as well from time to time, as many kids do bully, right? Its ability to cope with these stressors in a healthy way is not there. You may have a child who is acting out, having difficulty finding success in your school or in your agency, and for those self-esteems that may be damaged. Although so few people with an FASD get accurate diagnosis of FASD, many of them will get a diagnosis of a mental health condition or multiple mental health conditions or other IDDs as their lifetime progresses. We'll talk more about executive functioning on this next slide, but we want to introduce them here by saying that executive functioning is a set of skills that help us in order to plan our day, generalize across settings, and understand cause and effects. So we'll go on to the next slide. All right, here we go. Executive functioning. Difficulties with executive functioning impacts people's everyday lives in a big way. Ability to get to work or school, understand what is expected of you once you get there, and then actually doing these things. Another example is the ability to be adequate parent and remember all the things that parents need to remember in order to appropriately care for their child. So think about all the steps that it took you to get to your office today. You had to understand how long it would take you. You had to resist the temptation just to stay in bed all day, especially when it's, sprinkling outside. You had to be there, and you were expected to be at your office or school. You had to remember how to get there, follow directions on your GPS. You had to think about whether or not you needed to stop for gas on your way before you left home, and you had to allot extra time if you had to stop for gas. You also had to think about where you're going after this, what things you would need to get done before you leave today based on deadlines and completing interests. These are all executive functioning skills. Hopefully, looking at this list helps you think of the many ways that a deficit in executive functioning, like people with those with FASD, impact many areas of their life. For example, if a person is not able to adequately control their inhibitions, they may act in a way that is perceived of a socially inappropriate, which makes them holding a job and making friends very difficult. Or they may not be able to plan in the way that they would hope for. So, for example, if a person is not able to remember the negative consequences of a past action or a current situation, they may repeat the same type of mistakes. Because abstract concepts are very challenging for people with FASD because of their prenatal brain injury, understanding time and money is often a major difficulty. I remember going to a conference and Dr. Chasnoff gave an example of working with a student who had a FASD, and he was expected to go to the wall, touch the wall, and then hop backward or hop on one foot and give him a high five. And so this child, had the executive functions, and he said, repeated back, because he was also pleasing and saying, yes, I know what to do. And so he got to the wall and he turned around and he couldn't remember that he was supposed to hop backwards and give a high five. And so it can be very, very difficult, and you have to work with them very repetitively, which brings us to the next slide. And Diana's going to talk about ideas for working with these children and people who have an FASD.
Yeah. Tips for working with someone who may have an FASD. There are some tips that can be very helpful when you're working with someone who may have an FASD or with a parent or family member of someone with an FASD. We often hear from family members, work differently, not harder, which means that we have to find what works for this individual person that we're working with and do what works, rather than repeating your own effort in the same way and continuing to be frustrated or angry or disappointed. Many people benefit from routine, but keeping timing and expectations regular and consistent is hugely important for a person with an FASD. This gives them some sense of control in their day and can help them to mitigate stress and anxiety. Giving a complex set of instructions makes understanding difficult for anyone. Now, if you're a person with FASD and you may have some executive functioning deficits related to processing and memory, giving you a complex set of instructions is setting you up for failure. Break instructions down into single steps and check for understanding as you go. For example, instead of clean your room, you may want to say, go put your clean clothes away in the dresser and then come back to me after you've done that, and I'll tell you what the next step. Understanding sarcasm, idioms, and figures of speech can be difficult for a person with an FASD. They are literal, concrete thinkers, so that we have to be thoughtful about this. People with an FASD may appear like Amelia Bedelia, the children's story book character. Do any of you know who she is? So in the story, Amelia works as a housekeeper, and the homeowner leaves her a list of things that she needs to do that day. The list includes things like dust the furniture and dress the chicken. Amelia takes these instructions literally, and she pours powder on the furniture and makes an outfit to put on the chicken. Role play and modeling are some of the best ways to increase a person with an FASD's abilities. Next slide, please. Common myths: alcohol plus women plus pregnancy. Knowing that you need to be aware of your own judgments, let's step back for a minute and examine some of the myths around the combination of alcohol, women, and pregnancy. Take a moment to consider your own opinion or personal judgment and recognize that this is your personal bias and may not be a fact. It has likely been informed by your upbringing, your beliefs, and your own experience. Society in every corner of the world holds strong opinions about women and drinking. Historically, in the United States and most of the West, the common value has been that proper ladies do not drink. Alcohol consumption is sometimes thought to be related to a loose and a virtuous lifestyle. Of course, women have consumed alcohol throughout history, but this is a bias that still hangs on in a very deep way for many of us, even though our social norms have drastically and drastically changed. In this context, let's consider another common bias. Women who drink during pregnancy don't care about the risk. People may believe that it is women who don't care about the risk of drinking who give birth to alcohol-exposed children. But now consider this. Combined with the fact that roughly 80% of the population drinks alcohol, that half of all pregnancies are unplanned, we can deduce that many women are drinking alcohol and even binge drinking before they even know they are pregnant. Research from the Center for Disease Control in 2013 estimates that 1 in 5 high school girls binge drink, and 1 in 8 women binge drink at least once per month. In this report, binge drinking is defined as having 4 or more drinks at one time for one woman. So unfortunately, alcohol exposure at any time during pregnancy is unsafe. Julie, can you finish that thought for me for that slide, please? Or Lisa?
About the not me?
Yeah, about the unfortunate alcohol exposure at any time during pregnancy is unsafe.
Yes, it is unsafe for any woman to drink at any point, whether it's in the first trimester or the third trimester.
Thank you. Next slide, please. Okay, a perfect storm: stigma, social messages, and misinformation. It won't be a surprise to any of you that Texas provides a unique environment for preventing and addressing FASD. Think about it. We drink alcohol when we are celebrating something. We drink when we're sad. We drink it because it's Friday. We drink because it's Monday. New research shows us that binge drinking may be more damaging than occasional drinking when it comes to the impact on a fetus. Binge drinking, as defined by the CDC, is more than 3 standard drinks at one time for one woman. 2013 research from CDC indicates that 1 in 5 high school girls binge drink, and 1 in 8 women binge drink at least once a month. Combined with the fact that almost half of all pregnancies are unplanned, and that alcohol consumption, even before a woman knows that she is pregnant, can be harmful, we have a serious issue here. To add to this complexity, family planning clinic access is increasingly difficult to access. Some women report going to their contraceptive visit and hearing for the first time that there are restrictions, like, we can't see you within 10 days of your last period. There are many obstacles to the appointment itself, if you're lucky enough to get one, depending on your insured status, etc. So if you don't get the message about the dangers of alcohol consumption during pregnancy, an exposure does occur. Children who do have FASD may not ever get a diagnosis of one of the FASDs, although they will likely face health consequences throughout their lifetimes. With limited support, positive outcomes are less likely for a person with FASD. We can advance the slide, please.
Thank you. So stigma is heavy and is something that is a large part of fetal alcohol spectrum disorders. Women who use alcohol during pregnancy and later learn that their use may have negatively impacted their child are likely to experience guilt, shame, denial, and anger. It's important, though, to note that many women truly do not understand the possible impact. Stigmatizing or criticizing, blaming these women and families is not a helpful solution for anyone. According to a 2012 NoFast survey of 96 Circle of Hope members, here are the top reasons women drink while pregnant. I thought using alcohol was safe. My doctor never told me I should not be drinking. I didn't know I was pregnant. I stopped as soon as I found out. I am an alcoholic. I could not stop and was ashamed to look for treatment. I was afraid to look for help. I was afraid I would be arrested and I would lose my children. Unfortunately, most people still believe that birth mothers should have known better. Having a child diagnosed with an FASD is like being branded with a scarlet letter. The family faces continuing shame and stigma. Circle of Hope is a great referral for women who are biological parents of a child with a known or suspected FASD. It is run by the National Organization of Fetal Alcohol Syndrome, NoFast, and Circle of Hope provides a safe and supportive space for women to share and learn from and with each other, and to become trained on FASD and to share their stories and knowledge with others. If you're going to talk about alcohol with women that you work with or know, the use of normalization will be key. It is important for women to hear that many women drink before they know that they are pregnant, along with the rest of these messages. They're designed to mitigate guilt and help a woman understand that you're coming from a place of compassion and support. There are many women who do not have alcohol dependence but have a child with an FASD, so we should not assume that every woman needs treatment. For some, the prevention approach is as simple as education. Regarding women's increased likelihood to use alcohol, we're talking about a complex set of topics that are very personal and sensitive. They should always be discussed carefully and with intentional and explicit respect. If a woman's male partner berates her for her choice not to use, she may have a harder time sticking with her plan. And similarly, if he is a support, she may have better success. On the flip side of that, if a woman is experiencing intimate partner violence or experiencing a mental health concern, or be operating under incomplete or inaccurate information about the safety of drinking, she is at higher risk of alcohol use. Next slide, please, and we'll hand this back over to Diana.
Awareness and raising efforts, and this is great for me because I am a community partner. Based on your participation in the collaborative, each of you already had some interest in helping to raise awareness of FASD, which is wonderful. Talking with others in your life, community, or in your professional network is a great way to spread the message, and many of you are actively doing this already. However, we want to encourage you to think about who else needs to know about FASD that you could potentially reach. There are many kinds and types of policy that impact individuals with an FASD and their families, people at risk of prenatally exposing children, and prevention efforts. We encourage you to think about the various areas that are important to FASD work as you prepare to raise awareness. Here are some examples. FASD efforts at the national level via SAMHSA have recently been defunded. Is it possible to get those funds reinstated? What do the cuts mean for the FASD work going on in Texas? Policies related to pregnant women and their use of substances like alcohol could have direct implications, both positive and negative, on chances of reducing prenatal alcohol exposure and perinatal health. Make sure that giving all pregnant women information about preventing FASD is another policy to think about. Services for people with an FASD and their family are definitely lacking in Texas and across the country. What policies could be changed to better serve these families? Unfortunately, policymakers don't always have all the information that they would like or should know regarding FASD. And one message that we want you to hear here is that you could be the bearer of FASD information to your policymakers. They truly want to hear what matters to you. And this is particularly accurate if you are their constituent. They represent you at the Capitol. This slide lists some pointers for you to consider if you are considering reaching out to a legislator, or their staff to raise awareness of FASD issues. Remember that not all people who have the potential to make or change policy are elected officials in Austin. Agency leaders can make change in their policies without legislation, so don't forget about them. If you are considering going to a meeting with a legislator or their staff in their district office or at the Capitol, this can certainly be intimidating. However, if you are well prepared, you can be very effective. One way to do this is to talk with another collaborative member, perhaps someone on the promotions work group, ahead of time to run through your plan of what to say and to think about some likely questions. Another good tack is to learn about and become familiar with this particular legislator ahead of time. Example, is he or she someone who has previously taken a stand on disability issues? What does this person identify as the most important issues in his or her district? Is there a way for you to link what's important to them with what's important to you? Also keep in mind that the bias stigma element of FASD can make educational visits with legislative offices challenging. Legislative staff and interns can be very influential and should always be treated with respect. Although it may feel disappointing to meet with a staff person instead of the legislator themselves, rest assured that they have influence over what their boss hears about you and your work. Giving people a different understanding about an issue by adding a personal story can be key if it is well done. Are you a family member of a person with FASD? Have you worked with people who have an FASD? Do you have a particularly compelling story that you have permission to share from or about someone with an FASD? They are likely to ask for data and numbers, how many people in my district may be impacted, for example. But adding in a personal story helps people, especially those who are unfamiliar with FASD, to gain a deeper understanding and could possibly even compel them to take action. Overall, being concise and clear about what you would like the office to do is very important. Following up with the legislative offices is usually going to have to happen if you want to reach them, get an appointment, or even help develop a move policy along. Our elected officials are very busy people, as are their staff, and this is particularly true during legislative sessions, beginning January of every odd year and lasting until early summer. So you may need to call a few times. Another important step is to thank officers for meeting with you and giving them any additional information in response to their questions that you may have not originally had available. If you're interested in learning more about how to best engage in awareness or raising efforts, please reach out to the Promotions Work Group and our TOPDD. Next slide.
Here's a list of some resources and online resources for you all. We have the TOPDD who put on this webinar and is the collaborative host for us. We also have the CDC, Recovering Hope video, Strategies Not Solutions Handbook, National Organization on Fetal Alcohol Syndrome, No FAS, and SANSA Treatment Improvement Protocol, FASD tips. Next slide.
Yes.
We'd like to thank you, each of you, for your time today and for your work with the Texas FASD Collaborative. We are very grateful for you and sincerely appreciate your attention and participation. We'll take any questions if there's any questions.
Everyone, this is Leah Davies. If you do have a question, you are not audible to the presenter, so if you would please type your question into the questions box, that would be ideal. But while we wait for you all to submit any questions, I want to thank the team who put this together, in particular the presenters, Diana Mitchell, Julie Steed, and Lisa Harrison-Ramirez, but also to their colleagues who have been a big part of making this happen, Dr. Mary Tijerina, as well as Sherry Santa. You guys are fantastic, and we're very grateful for your time today. Angela, have you received any questions from the audience?
No, no questions at this time.
Okay, well, there's a couple little things I wanted to add, if you guys don't mind. And one of those things is that I wanted to alert you all. Some of you are familiar with this already, but I wanted to alert you all to the fact that there is a research group coming to Texas this week, as a matter of fact, to offer an evaluation study on an intervention for adolescents who have an FASD. And they are still accepting new people who are interested. So if any of you happen to know someone who is an adolescent with a diagnosed FASD that lives or would be willing to travel to the Houston, Austin, or Lubbock regions of the state, please reach out to me, Leah Davies at TOPDD, so I can get you some more info about how to connect those people with this potential exciting research project. And also I wanted to add to that it was mentioned, and I appreciate you all mentioning the Texas FASD Collaborative. Everyone who is on this call is a part of that group in some capacity already, but I always want to encourage you to refer colleagues or people that are within your professional network. If you think of people you'd like to see at this table or who seem interested, we'd love to hear from you. All right, I don't see any questions. Are there any, Angela, that I'm missing?
Hey, yes, I was just going to jump in and say we did have a question and a comment that reads, excellent presentation. Will the slide presentation be available online or emailed to participants? And I want to let everyone know that actually we've attached a PDF copy of the slides to your GoToWebinar task pane that you can download, and we will be emailing a copy of the presentation out.
So just to clarify, if you're looking at the box on the right side of your screen, which popped up when the Go to My Webinar opened, if you scroll down to what's near the bottom of the screen, the word Handouts, if you click on that, you'll see the PDF FASD training for Texas FASD Collaborative, so you're able to click on there if you'd like it. And the PowerPoint slides were also emailed out, but anyone who did not receive them, I'm happy to resend, so if you'll just reach out to me, Leah Davies, I will follow up with you directly. Thanks, Angela. Any other questions? Sounds like that wasn't really much of a question as much as a comment.
I have another question. Will the webinar recording be accessible online? I can answer that too. Yes, Angela, if technology allows, we're going to try to make this available online.
And I assume that was you, Dr. Nash. The concept is one that we've talked about a lot as a collaborative over the years, that there's a need for recent updated information to be relatively permanently accessible in an online format, and that is our intention, is to place this webinar or one of the webinars. Each part of the steering committee is offering this webinar, so it will be offered several times in the next few weeks by different members of the steering committee, and we do plan to post at least one of those recordings to our website eventually. Any other comments from anyone else who wants to ask a question or otherwise make any comments about anything related to the FASD Collaborative? Okay, well, we are thankful for your time today, and it's always a wonderful problem to end early, right, to have more time than you expected. But I think if there aren't any additional questions, we'll go ahead and close here. If you do think of questions later on, we encourage you to send those questions to the TOPDD office, either to Leah Davies or Angela Morales, and what we'll do is follow up with you directly, and if the question needs to go on to the facilitators, the trainers you heard from today, we'll make sure that happens as well. But without further ado, I hope you all have an excellent week, and we're very appreciative for your time. Take good care. Bye-bye.